Hello, navigators. Today we're going to talk about conflict in literature. The first and most important thing you need to understand is that every story has a conflict. If I said Susie went to the store, I'm just listing an event. If I said Susie went to the store and got mugged on the way home, now you've got a story. So why is conflict so important? Well, without the conflict, there is no plot. You've got to have a problem to solve. That is what the story wraps around. There's always a main conflict, but then there are usually multiple smaller conflicts throughout the story. The conflict is introduced in the rising action. It's faced head-on during the climax. It begins to work itself out during falling action, and then it's resolved during the resolution. So if you picture that plot structure in your mind, the conflict follows every part of it. It's the heart of the story. There are many different types of conflict: man versus man, man versus self, man versus technology, man versus nature, and man versus society. I would add also man versus supernatural. They're all different types, and you can say man versus man, or you can say character versus character. Either way, it means the same thing. There are two types of conflict: internal and external. And it's very easy to remember internal because there's only one type. External has several. The difference between the two is very simple. If it's internal, it's taking place inside of the body. It's something that the character is dealing with on their own. They're struggling with a decision. They're trying to figure out what they should do, or they're very upset about something that's happened. In external, it takes place outside the body. So it deals with others. Oftentimes, conflict is described as a struggle between opposing forces. Okay, if it's internal conflict, then it's a struggle between two opposing forces within a person. Good versus evil, right versus wrong. Should they do it? Should they not? External is struggling between two opposing forces outside of the body. And so again, with internal conflict, there's only one type: character versus self. That's it. Should Homer eat that last donut? That's such a struggle. Now, with external conflict, there are several types: character versus character, character versus nature, character versus society, character versus technology, and character versus the supernatural. Character versus character is the first one that pretty much every story needs to have that. Maybe not as our main character, or excuse me, as our main conflict, but it will be in the story somewhere. Character versus nature, it just depends. Now, with Hatchet, I will tell you that is one of the best books for looking at character versus nature. Think of all the things that have happened to Brian, the encounters with the animals, weather, all sorts of different things coming up, and just the land itself, trying to learn to navigate and survive in the wilderness. Character versus society, as I've told you before, a lot of times that will show up in a dystopian novel when characters are opposing the government in some way, or the government is enforcing something on society. But it also deals with law. So anytime there's something involving a judge or a courtroom, the judge is acting as a representative of society. So for example, in Holes, when Stanley went to court, that was an example of character versus society. Character versus technology. Now, you need to expand what you think of as terms of technology. It's not just computers and robots. It's tools and things as well. In other words, hatchets. And then last but not least, character versus the supernatural. Those are things like fate, ghosts, aliens, anything kind of outside the natural world. Character versus character is pretty straightforward and easy. And as I said, most stories have at least one character versus character conflict. It's usually an extra conflict, a minor conflict. It could be the major conflict as well, but a lot of stories have it as a minor conflict, and you may have a couple different examples of where characters have some sort of struggle between them. But with Hatchet, the main one we are going to be talking about is man versus nature, character versus nature, as well as character versus self. And so, of course, there are different things he's had to deal with: weather, animals, the land itself, just surviving the plane crash, and there are a few little odds and ends that have occurred to him. The two chapters that you're reading today are two that I really hate to miss out and not read with you. They're some of my favorites, so I hate that, but I hope you enjoy the chapters. And so after you read chapters 15 and 16, then you're going to go ahead and complete this chart for conflicts that you see in Hatchet. And so, of course, we have, character versus character. So think back to the beginning of the story. You're going to see a little bit of that, not a lot. Character versus nature, you could go on for days, right? You could list all sorts of examples. The other, though, important conflict would be character versus self. So these two, character versus nature and character versus self, those are the two that you're going to focus on quite a bit, right? However, think about it. Character versus the supernatural, that's a lightning bolt there, so that should clue you into a few things. Character versus technology, they make it easy. They give you an example of the tool. When we talk about opposing forces or struggle with opposing forces, think of the way he uses his hatchet. He has accidentally nicked it, right? And it's his most important tool. And so he's done several things that he's realized he has to be very careful with that tool. Now, one thing that's going to be a little difficult is character versus society. We will talk about that actually at the end of the book, but you're not going to see too much of it just yet, so you can hold off on this one for right now. There'll be a little bit here with character versus character, but otherwise the circled conflicts are the ones you're going to concentrate on the most. Character versus nature, character versus self, character versus supernatural, and character versus technology.